important presentation, and thank you for the introduction. So Sequoia Living, we're committed to being a great place to live and work. It's part of our mission to improve the quality of life for our residents and staff and reduce our building's impact on the environment and create a healthier and more resilient community. We're always looking for better ways. Technology is improving daily as we speak. So we try to incorporate all those different items that are being created and invented, and old technologies refined and new technology is getting better. Next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to do is just talk about a fun thing, and that is at two of our sites, actually, right now, actually in Sequoia's Portola Valley, we currently have a herd of goats that are helping us eat all of the help mitigate fire hazards throughout the area. So they'll be there for about 3 weeks. And they've actually done this type of work at the Tamalpais and Marin, and we'll continue to do this type of work at those two sites because we do have a lot of acreage that is prone to wildfires, as well as having a lot of vegetation. So the beauty of this is a herd of goats will roughly eat about 50,000 feet of grass per day. They're not going to create much noise other than their natural noise that they have. They're really fun to watch and look at. The maintenance that they do is very important to our ecosystem. It helps reduce the fuel load. It's going to help with insurance cost and hopefully reduce the possibility of wildfire by eating pretty much everything that's in their way. They will eat just about everything. So as long as you give them water and a place to sleep, and they're monitored, they will actually have a great life there. Many of the goats that are used are actually rescue goats from different farms, local farms in the Bay Area, as well as state of California. So they are actually getting a really good meal. And all we ask them to do is eat and sleep. So it's terrific. They also will eat poison oak, which is a great help for all of us. So it's terrific to have them out in the communities. It's also an activity for anyone to sit by and watch the goats eat and enjoy life. Next slide, please. So other things that we're doing throughout Sequoia Living at the Tamalpais and Marin, we've introduced some electrical vehicles for use for medical appointments, doctor's appointments, activities, excursions throughout the community. We're looking at electrical vehicles, total electrical vehicles at other sites as well as providing electrical charging stations to reduce vehicles that have fossil fuels. So we're trying to really do our part. There is a little bit of a shortage in regards to some of the vehicles that we want to get because of the chip shortage, but hopefully that'll be resolved by the end of the year. But clearly this is the way we have to go to reduce our emissions throughout the world, is to go really as electric or better. And like I said, technology is getting better every day as we speak. And there might be other ways of doing it that are besides electric, and those are for engineers to work on. So they will help with the local air quality. They help reduce noise pollution, fewer greenhouse emissions and gases and air pollutants. And those are really things that we're looking at. Next slide, please. At the Sequoia's Portola Valley, I'm really excited about this project as well. We're currently installing 2,600 solar panels that are going to be on roughly 20 buildings throughout the campus. It's a 42-acre campus. You could see the picture here where we're going to generate 1.5 megawatts of power with roughly 105% of the electrical need to actually take that site completely off the grid. And that is an exciting project. It's a very large project. We're currently underway with that project, and it should be completed by I'd say August, unless it's a little bit sooner. But they've got about a third of the buildings completed with rails. and we're waiting for the solar panels to be installed, and then you'll see the electrical costs go down. And there's so many benefits to solar, and it's really an exciting project. It's a very large project. It's the largest of all the Sequoia Living buildings, and a very large project actually in San Mateo County and that region. So super excited about that, and more news to follow on that one. Next slide, please. Cogeneration. This has actually been in place at the Sequoia Living continuing care retirement communities for the Tamalpais, Sequoia San Francisco, and Sequoia's Portola Valley. We've had this in place well before 2006. And what is cogeneration? Cogeneration is where we generate roughly 75 to 76% of the electrical need for that particular building. And the waste heat that is generated by the engines that are fired and fueled by natural gas will actually heat the hot water that is used to heat the buildings and resident rooms. And what does that mean? So that means that it actually takes the boilers that are normally providing hot water heating throughout the entire building, and they pretty much go on standby. And the hot water that is produced and used for hot water heating is going through a series of heat exchangers that are connected strategically to the cogeneration units. And then they transfer that heat that is generated to the hot water, which flows to the resident rooms and provides heat to those resident rooms. So it's a very efficient system, and we're proud of having that system as well. We will have to evaluate how that actually works for Sequoia's Portola Valley now that we're going to be going solar. So more news to follow on that one. Next slide, please. Along with all the different energy efficient programs that we've added at the CCRCs, we've also remodeled and did tenant improvements for Eastern Park Apartments in San Francisco, Western Park Apartments in San Francisco, and Town Park Towers, which is down in San Jose. Each time we have remodeled all those areas, we've made them more water efficient, more energy efficient. There's considerable electrical savings by shedding load. We've gone and transferred to LED systems and low voltage electrical programs, including life safety enhancements as well. Obviously for water closets and faucets and showers and all those items that are used in resident rooms as well as other areas, we've gone to very energy efficient models. And in many times, we've actually exceeded the city and county of San Francisco requirements and city and county of San Jose, along with the HUD requirements. So we're very proud of that. We have a project that is currently underway at Eastern Park, and that should be completed fairly shortly. Next slide, please. Viamonte at Walnut Creek is our newest CCRC facility. It is a Platinum LEED certified facility, which means that it is very energy efficient. The indoor environmental air quality is at the highest standard we could possibly get. It is a very technologically advanced facility. So a lot of the different systems that we have controlling the HVAC components or heating, ventilating, and air conditioning components, as well as water efficiencies. The materials that are used in those buildings are all of the latest sustainable products, as well as very energy efficient systems. So we're very excited about that. We also are very happy with creating less of a carbon footprint for the residents that live there, as well as the staff, because the surrounding area by Viamonte has a shopping center that is, you can't really see it in this picture. However, there's a shopping center that is close by with a large grocery store outlet, as well as several restaurants and other shops that you can go to. So residents can actually walk there, or it's at least close by. So the carbon footprint is less. They also have right next to the building is an interactive playground for younger generations to come by and visit, as well as the neighborhood and the community. So we're excited about that. It's an open frame architecture. It's a lovely building to go to and live in. There is a heritage oak that you can see in this picture that was maintained, and purposely the building was built around it to protect that species of tree. So we're very, very happy with that. And it's an exciting place, and the design on it is really above board. So very happy about that facility. Next slide, please. So in summary, we're really trying to do the best we can, across the board, looking at the latest technology, working with designers and engineers and suppliers, looking at electrical vehicles to reduce our impacts, solar panels, as well as future solar panels that we are looking at in other facilities that may not have the horizontal or plot of land like Portola Valley has, which is 42 acres, but maybe looking at something we can do vertically. And technology is getting there in regards to some of the things that you could do with glass. So we're looking at that in the future, as well as efficiencies across all of the communities for electrical, for water, for technology, using natural things such as goat grazing, and maybe even other items that we could bring in for our consumables, such as compost. And that'll be talked, we're going to talk about that in future webinars with our partner Morrison. So we'll be talking about all kinds of things, and it's an exciting time. There is a lot of things that we can do on our own. I'm very excited about the future. Because we really do need to start right now. We've talked about this for a long time, but the future for our grandchildren, my grandchildren as well, it's to make their lives a little bit better. So looking at that, I want to thank you, and I'll pass this back to Lola.
Thank you so much, Ray. That was very insightful. We're delighted to hear about all the amazing things happening at Sequoia Living. I do want to let our participants know who are watching the webinar today that we are going to have a section for Q&A later in the webinar. In fact, we anticipate a lot of questions, so we are able to go beyond 3 o'clock today. So don't hold back your questions, but let's do that at the end so that we can have our second speaker come on. And Mitchell Beer, go ahead and turn on your mic and your camera. And I want to introduce Mitchell, who is the publisher and editor of a fantastic online publication, and that focuses on climate change and global warming. Mitchell is going to bring to the table the scientific research behind climate change, what and why we need to know this, and things that we can take action with. So Mitchell, welcome.
Thanks very much, Lola, and Ray, and everybody else for taking the time to be here today. It has been what actually the most exciting thing about this assignment has been to learn about everything that you're already doing with Sequoia. And really, I plan to tell your goat story everywhere I go. And bear in mind that goats are great for clearing the underbrush and the weeds around solar farms as well. As you said, Lola, I'm the publisher and managing editor of The Energy Mix, based in Ottawa, Canada. The Energy Mix is a thrice weekly newsletter and an all-the-time news website on climate change, energy, and the shift off carbon. And I have to tell you that the starting point for this story is very personal for me, as Lola and Ray have each shared in your own way, in different ways. For me, it's that I will never forget my daughter's first major asthma attack. She was just past her second birthday. We'd never seen asthma before, so we had no idea what we were looking at. So by the time we got her into the car to the hospital, her eyes were rolling back in her head was rolling back in her car seat. The emergency nurse said her blood oxygen was at an incredibly scary, dangerous 83%. That would not have been the moment to tell me that if we could just solve climate change, cleansing the air and preventing my daughter's asthma wouldn't it just be a great co-benefit of climate action? In that moment, in my universe, the only benefit worth thinking about, the only benefit worth fighting for, was keeping my baby alive. I've told this story on stage before. But I'm going to let you in on a bit of the backstory because as parents and grandparents, many of you yourselves, I suspect some of you might appreciate it. Rachel is 28 now. Her asthma is under control. She's one of the strongest, most powerful people I've ever met. And of course, she'll always be at the center of my life. She also knows about the 20 or so years when I couldn't get more than a few words into that story without losing myself in tears. So I'm really proud of myself. I'm doing well with it today, at least so far. When Rachel heard a few years ago that I planned to start a TEDx talk with her asthma story, her reaction to my wife was, why would Dad do that? He knows that story is his kryptonite. I tell the story and I keep on telling it for a few reasons, apart from challenging myself not to cry. It tells us that climate change is about the science and the modeling and the projections, but it's also about the most important things that happen in our families and communities. It tells us that when we tackle climate change, the quickest way to drive down our greenhouse gas emissions is with actions that we already know we need to make our lives better, safer, healthier. It tells us that longevity, the theme of this session, is a goal that we all fundamentally hold in common, all of us, everywhere, in every community, in every part of the world, and at every point in the life cycle. Matters just as much when you're 3 as it does when you're 83. Or 93 or 103. So an interest in average health span, I love that term, is something we all share. And actually, I think it tells us that those things we already want, the things that we in the climate community, we climate hawks, mistakenly like to call co-benefits. Those are actually the things that already matter the most to the vast majority of people who don't already live inside the bubble we've created of climate change concern. Flipping the script in our own minds is important for 2 reasons. It tells us that those things we already have on our personal to-do lists are worth working on, that we're right to want healthier local foods, homes that are safe from drought and wildfire, power utilities that are set up to protect us from hazards rather than literally sparking them. And it tells us that if we start from those immediate, important needs, taking action on climate change can be about opportunity and gain, not loss and pain. So before we go on, I'm going to ask you to think about the things that matter most in your life, how they tie back to climate change, whether it's an impact that you're concerned about or something you think could be done about it. Just take a minute and type your answer into the chat, and then we'll keep going. I feel like I should play the Jeopardy tune, but you know. Just anything that comes to mind about climate change, something you're concerned about, an opportunity you see, how it ties in with your life. Grandchildren, thank you, Linda. Lola, I didn't know you had asthma. Yes, yes, the tie-ins. If you're near a coal plant, if you're near a wildfire. Better life and environment for my grandchildren, thanks, Ray. Wildfires, Children Catalina, ocean life, yeah. Okay, let's get into some quick climate science, but we will keep it fairly quick. The last time the United Nations went there, it was the last of 3 working group reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the report ran 2,913 pages, and I'm not even making that up. So I promise you will be a lot quicker and a lot more basic than that. But a few things just to set the stage. First, and probably most important to understand, climate change is happening now. I feel like I don't need to lecture you about that in Northern California. You know that, you're living with it, but it is with us right now. We often, all of us, we talk about we're doing this for our children and our grandchildren. Of course we are, and we're doing it for right now as well. Climate change is caused by an increase in the greenhouse gases entering the atmosphere, and the lion's share of that increase since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution has been caused by human activity. It doesn't make us evil, but that's still true. The most common greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. It's responsible for about 80% of the excess warming. Other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide, they're less plentiful, but they pack a bigger punch. Methane is about 85 times more potent a greenhouse gas over a 20-year period. Nitrous oxide is about 300 times more powerful. And that 20-year span is all important because that's the time available to us to draw down emissions and get climate change under control. We've been hearing for years that greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced, but so far they're at record levels and they're still rising. Something I'll be happy to go back over in the Q&A, the science shows that fossil fuels are the primary source of the greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. Other major sources include animal agriculture, other big industrial processes, and decomposing waste, especially food and other organic waste. If you've been hearing that the climate is always changing, that there's natural variability baked into the system, that's true. But natural variability cannot and does not explain the warming and the other changes that we've seen, beginning with the Industrial Revolution and really speeding up, really amping up after the Second World War. That's almost all been caused by human activity. There are variations like La Nina, El Nino, but it's caused by human activity. So the question this leads into that you might want to take up in the Q&A is how we maintain the comforts and the quality of life that many of us have been able to enjoy thanks to the fossil fuel era, and make those benefits more widely available around the world by finding more efficient ways to get the things we need and want without bringing on a global crisis and driving it out of control. The good news, and this is relatively recent, is that if we do manage to get our emissions under control, we could see the benefits sooner than scientists previously thought. For a long time, the science showed that even if we brought emissions to zero tomorrow, the globe's atmospheric systems were so big and complex that it would take decades for greenhouse gas concentrations to start going down. But the latest research shows that if countries could really get their emissions to zero or close to it, we would start to see the effects in 3 or 4 years, not 30 or 40. That finding is not guaranteed, and it means we still have a very heavy lift to get emissions under control. But it gives us hope that if we can get this done, it's still worth doing. And with the huge levels of despair we've been seeing on climate change, hope is definitely something worth having. But that despair you've been hearing about, that maybe you've been feeling from time to time, it isn't unreasonable, because climate impacts, once again, as you know, are with us right now, today, and they are severe. They include more frequent and severe droughts, wildfires, heat waves, and famines, more frequent and severe storms and flooding, rising sea levels that threaten coastal communities. For years, we said that no single disaster could be directly attributed to climate change, but that a warming atmosphere was more like loading the dice for more frequent severe crises. So it's like a baseball player on steroids, and of course we could all name names, who hits 100 home runs in a season instead of 30 or 40. But attribution science, as it's called, has been advancing by leaps and bounds. So we know now that the heat dome and drought last summer that burned the town of Lytton, British Columbia to the ground would have been virtually impossible without climate change. So this is a town in my country, in your time zone, that needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. And by the way, they're not getting a post office this time, which has been controversial, brought on by climate change. Brought to you by climate change is a killer heat wave in South Asia that was 30 times more likely as a result of a warming atmosphere. And one paper said 100 times more likely. So you've probably heard a lot about the drive to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. That really is considered the guardrail to hold off the worst impacts of climate change, far worse than what we're already seeing today at just over 1 degree Celsius. And that's why governments and industries everywhere are under pressure to reduce their emissions by 45 or 50% by the end of this decade and hit net zero by 2050. This gets into the politics of climate change, and my assignment here today is to talk about the science and community solutions, not the politics. But if you do have questions about net zero targets and how we get there, we'll be happy to go there in the Q&A. So mercifully, this concludes our science segment. And once again, I would welcome any questions in the Q&A, anything I've said or any ground I haven't covered that you'd like to hear more about on climate science. And then there's lots more ahead.
So Mitchell, thank you. Well, if anybody has some questions, you can go ahead and use the Q&A box, and then I can read those questions to Mitchell. And Mitchell, so my question for you is about the city in British Columbia, because we're very familiar with wildfires here in the Bay Area and throughout California. And I think everybody's familiar with Paradise, California, that burnt down as well as the devastating wildfires in Santa Rosa. So tell us a little bit more about where this city is at in British Columbia and when this happened.
Well, the story in Lytton, this was last summer, the end of June, beginning of July. It carried over our July 1st Canada Day holiday. You, just given the way news coverage works in both countries, you probably heard more about the heat dome over the Pacific Northwest. Well, it hit British Columbia as well. And if I remember correctly, parts of Alberta next door. And Lytton, the day before it burned, had hit an all-time high temperature record for Canada, which I believe was 47.7 degrees Celsius. I'd have to look that up. But it was horribly hot and it was horribly dry. And so the best understanding at this point is that a freight train went through town. It generated sparks along the rail. The sparks caught the bush, caught the foliage by the train track, and the town burned in minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. People mostly were very lucky to get out, but the town is still a reconstruction site, as I'm sure Paradise was at the same point along the way. There have been issues with slow repayment for people who needed the dollars to be able to rebuild. I believe there have been stories of people's insurance claims not being honored. That's been happening elsewhere as well with different kinds of climate emergencies. But what it comes back to is it was a heat dome, which was an atmospheric condition that brought the heat in, and then it just sat. It didn't move off. It was a very dry place, and then between the heat and the low humidity, it didn't take very much. And frankly, there were sitting ducks. The town was gone almost before people could react.
So Diana put in the Q&A about water sources for her home in fire country. Can you speak a little bit about the water sources?
That would be a situation that would be really specific to your location. I guess what I would say is, first of all, you know this without me saying it, to always have water supplies, backup water supplies available when you need it. The other point that we've been hearing, whether it's in wildfire zones, frankly, or in flood zones, because so much of what goes wrong with climate change is about water in all the wrong places. You know, there's not enough over here, there's too much over there. They don't average out. It's one or the other. You know, we get floods as well as wildfires. And in both of those circumstances, there are a lot of things that you can do to either build or renovate a building so that it will be safer from whatever the most important local impacts are. And that would include, you know, building in what water supply you need in a drought area, in a drought zone. But I think the whole idea of, I think two things about the whole idea of trying to protect ourselves in our own homes from something as big and all encompassing as a drought. The first is, yes, absolutely do whatever you can. And secondly, realize that what you're trying to cope with is something that comes under the heading of a climate impact that is too big to deal with as on our own as individuals. That's why we have cities, states, national governments, international cooperation when it happens, because sometimes a lot of the time, the problems are bigger than we can deal with on our own. So it is more important with each passing day, with each passing minute, to pay more attention to how we adapt to the impacts that are right in front of us. But we also have to realize that mitigation, which is the process of driving down our greenhouse gas emissions and keeping them down once and for all, mitigation is the new adaptation, because beyond a certain point, beyond 1.5, there's no adapting to it. It'll just come at us too hot, too heavy, too frequent, too many multiple disasters, sometimes coming at us simultaneously. The only way to deal with that is by preventing it, by driving down emissions and getting greenhouse gases under control once and for all, which we can do. And I'll be getting to that. So it's not as though all is lost, quite the contrary, but we really have to get on with it.
All right, so our next questions are more specific about what can we do to conserve water, monitor water usage, and then we do have a question about what can we do to recognize the reality of climate change. And I know the second part of your presentation is about what we can do. So I'll let you move forward with your presentation, and then we can answer those questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The specifics about what we can do are maybe a little bit farther on, but where I think I'd like to go next is something that I think is really important when we think about climate change. And that is, well, I've just been saying this, but maybe in a bit more detail, that it really is the ultimate good news, bad news story. If we terrify ourselves and each other with stories of imminent doom, that isn't helpful, because that just drives everyone to give up. And if we convince ourselves that everything's fine because the technology will save us, or maybe the problem isn't as bad as the science says, sure, and we'd all love to live in that world. But that's really dangerous, because that takes us away from the hard work we have to do, all of us, to make those solutions work and to get everything done in time. So, I mean, you referred to paradise. I have to tell you that I dread it when I have to assign another one of the stories that I call the weather report to the energy mix, whether it's heat and drought in India, the killer cold snap that nearly collapsed the state power grid in Texas last year, the waves of forced migration that are already being triggered by sea level rise in Asia, or crop failures in Latin America, and that goes straight to your southern border. Or the moment again in your state when paradise literally burned to the ground. Last year, we realized as a publication, as a publishing house, that we had a duty to our readers to post a page of resources on climate despair to help people navigate a growing, terrifying crisis that has about a third of today's young adults deciding not to have children. But there is a lot of good news here as well. Despite the horrifying and scary stories that I have to handle every day, there are so many moments when I feel like I've won the lottery without buying a ticket. Because in my work, I get to scan through about 1,200 incoming news headlines a week, looking for the source material that will eventually become our story lineup. If you're thinking I need to get out more, you aren't wrong. But the balance of stories and that incoming news flow is what keeps me going in this work. There are so many smart, positive, transformative things that are happening right now in communities and governments and industries and research labs around the world. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy storage technologies are practical, affordable, and ready for prime time. In the United States, renewable energy accounts for the lion's share of new electricity supply and more than a quarter of total supply. The latest report showed 97.4% of new power generation coming from renewables over the first 3 months of this year. And for March, it was 100%, just renewable capacity being brought online. If I cherry pick my data, and as long as I let you know that I'm doing that, I can tell you that rooftop solar prices in one part of Australia fell far below a penny per kilowatt hour for parts of a 2-month period last August and September. Talk about cherry picking my data, but it did, right? When a quick search tells me that you've probably been paying 24 to 30 cents for that same electricity. Wind energy, particularly offshore wind, has been surging over the last 2 years with bigger turbines delivering more electricity than we would ever have thought possible as little as a decade ago. Just the other day, a former fossil industry consultant was telling me that offshore wind is such a fantastic new job opportunity for offshore oil workers, since half of them will need no retraining to bring their skills from oil platforms to wind machines. Battery storage in the United States is set to grow tenfold by next year, just the beginning of what analysts are calling a 10-year growth spurt. And we aren't far from the day when electric cars, trucks, and school buses will double as a storage system for the electricity we produce when the sun does shine and the wind does blow. That will help utilities match supply with demand, and vehicle owners get to make money into the bargain. And it's still true, same as it's ever been, that energy efficiency is the best deal of all. That's because the cheapest, safest, cleanest unit of energy is always the one that you never have to extract, generate, transport, or consume. The United Nations report that I mentioned earlier, it included a chapter on the 40 to 70% of the energy we consume that we could stop wasting just by doing the things we need to do more efficiently. And again, a lot of those changes are beyond our individual control, but we know what they are and we can get them done. Last year, 2 colleagues in Canada showed how our country can bring energy demand in all our homes and commercial buildings close to zero by 2035, way beyond LEED Platinum, groundbreaking as it is. We can end energy poverty once and for all and save enough wasted power to run 10 million electric vehicles across Canada. So even here, the news is not all good. The pandemic had already dropped us all into a tough, unpredictable economy before Russia's war in Ukraine made it a whole lot worse. We still need massive global investment in the climate transition, including fair financing for the poor countries on the front lines of the crisis that have done the least to bring that crisis about. But the moment is right, the momentum is right, and it's all accelerating. Just to give you an idea of how quickly it's accelerating, just over a decade ago, I was the deputy director of a project that modeled how Canada could meet its 2050 climate goals. We knew we had to rely heavily on renewables and energy efficiency. And we realized along the way that nobody had ever done an inventory of our country's renewable energy resources to make sure we would have enough. So we conducted the inventory. We found more than enough electricity to go around, but how we got there then tells you a lot about where we are now, which is why I'm going into this bit of detail. We were working to a 2050 target, but we limited ourselves to technologies that we could reasonably count on by 2030. That's because we knew that energy systems, industrial plants, even passenger cars take years to turn over. So if we built our scenario on options that were less certain and then they didn't pan out, we'd be setting ourselves up for a 20-year scramble to replace them, and we might not make it. So in January 2013, we issued an inventory of low carbon energy for Canada. There was much rejoicing, it finally got done. But we left out offshore wind. We said little or nothing about battery storage, little or nothing about hydrogen. All of those technologies are now at the top of the climate agenda in cities, countries, and boardrooms around the world. And meanwhile, the options we knew we could count on, like solar and wind, energy efficiency, smart building design, they're all doing at least as well as we expected them to. None of this is a guarantee that we're going to win the fight to get climate change under control. I don't remember anyone offering us any guarantees. I really wish they had. But all the good news that crosses my desk every day tells me that the last chapters of this story have not yet been written, and together we still have the power to write them, which means the only way we are sure of losing this battle of our lifetimes is to assume that it's already lost. So for the moment, that's enough from me. It's time for another audience poll. In the chat, please type in the one thing that makes you most optimistic about solving climate change, or the one thing that worries you the most about getting it done. So the first question was about climate change and how it affects your life. This is more about how you're feeling about climate change itself. We'll just take a minute with the chat. Linda, that's a great question about plastics, and I'm going to ask if we can bring that back in the Q&A at the end, if it's okay. Just because it's a slightly longer story. Impact on the economy. Paula, it's a really good question. There are transitions to go through. There are many people in your country and mine that are employed in the fossil fuel industries. But the short answer is that it's a matter of how we get from here to there. Because there are so many more, and I'll get into this a little bit later on, there are so many more jobs created in the renewable energy economy. The business opportunities have been estimated in the multiple trillions by the year 2030 if we get our act together. So there is change. Change is never easy, but the opportunities are so much bigger than the impact. And we just have to be sure that we get it done. And this is tremendously important in a way that leaves no one behind. There is a concept of just transition that really focuses on the communities and the workforces that currently depend on the fossil fuel industries. And the whole question is not whether we make the transition, but recognizing that it's coming at us, it's essential. And again, how do we make sure nobody gets left behind? And to your point, Linda, great faith in human resourcefulness, yes. I really think, I mean, for all the good news that crosses my desk along the bat, if I didn't fundamentally believe in that, I could not do this work. Okay, I'm going to go back to my, the next segment. Please keep the chat comments coming. But this next segment is the one you've been waiting for, Lola, because if you're wondering how to take action on climate change or what to do next, you aren't alone. It's one of the most commonly asked questions I hear. And the short answer is it depends, but frankly, thankfully, there's a longer answer. The good news is that climate change is so big and all-encompassing that it touches almost everything. So almost any action you take will make some difference. The bad news is that climate change is so big and all-encompassing that it touches almost everything. So it can be hard to choose the actions that make the most difference. Here's a way of addressing that actually originates with the group in San Francisco. And I love the sort of the closing of the circle of I'm sitting here half a continent away, 3 time zones away, and I'm able to bring you this wonderful insight that I learned indirectly from a group that, I don't know, is probably around the corner from Eastern Tower. The Pachamama Alliance divides climate action into 4 levels. The individual actions that we can take in our own lives, the things we can do together as friends and family, the changes that happen through neighborhoods, communities, and local institutions. So that's level 3. And then 4th, the bigger picture changes in the economy, policy, and government regulation. We do need action and change at all 4 levels. But one of the most important questions for community action is where we start as citizens. And if all goes well, how we bring other people along with us. Almost everyone I know started down this road at level 1 with that individual action, trying to recycle, compost, change out light bulbs, and if we're really dedicated, trying to drive and fly less. Those are important steps, but I really worry that they're not enough. We all have ways to reduce our own emissions. No one, absolutely no one is perfect at this. But I know so many people who are walking around with a huge load of guilt for not doing more. Then that guilt gives way to despair when we see that we're doing our bit, we're making the effort, and emissions are still rising. That's when many of us start into level 2, talking to friends and family about what they can do too to make a difference. Sometimes that turns into a great conversation, sometimes not so much. Too often, our loved ones feel like we're just lecturing at them. And I have to confess that sometimes, at least in my family over the years, they haven't been wrong. And I get the irony, by the way, that you're very patiently sitting there listening to me lecturing at you about how we have to stop lecturing. I haven't quite figured out how to solve that one yet in a speaking context. I could appreciate some help on that. Okay. But if you think about how you react when someone tells you to do something that isn't already on your to-do list, and they keep telling you and telling you, you know how that ends. All of a sudden, you're lucky to get invited back for Thanksgiving dinner. So that's when we go overboard on level 2. From there, people who really are determined to make a difference often skip right out to level 4, okay, where they try to get things done in state or federal policy, or even try to help shift the momentum at a United Nations climate conference. I've been to 3 of them. Those are incredibly important places to make change, but it's long, tough, grueling work where the outcome is rarely certain and it's never perfect. It's always a negotiated outcome. So I hate to say it, but level 4 too often is the place where good intentions go to die and community voices go to get burned out. That doesn't mean we give up on level 4. We can't. But it does make sense to start closer to home at level 3, in your building, your neighborhood, your community. Find like-minded people who live close by. Agree on one or a few climate solutions that get you excited. Then build that change with your own hands. If it's a community solar project or local food co-op, and if it's a solar project, it needs goats. It really needs goats. Or if you need action from city council, start having that conversation about how to get it done. I've also been thinking about some of the level 3 actions that we can all take at our age and stage. We can build conversations and support across the generations so that we seniors learn to understand and respect what teens and millennials are thinking and doing about climate change and get their respect back in return. I hate this back and forth, this blame back and forth between boomers and millennials, because when we do that, we all lose. We absolutely have to recognize what assets and strengths we bring to the fight. We have perspective and past experience that can point to faster solutions. We often have free time to contribute. You be the judge, but many of us do. We have dollars we can contribute to the right action plan. or longtime contacts and associates who can help us get things done, get more done better and faster. One powerful strategy is to bring people together around food so that we literally break bread together and decide what to do next. You can organize a local kitchen table conversation where a half dozen or 10 people talk about climate change and what it means to them. Everyone gets to decide where that conversation goes. So it might be about helping each other stay safe in the next drought or heat wave, making sure everyone has enough water, how to protect the local infrastructure we need, like hospitals and schools, or how to build the parks and green space and walking and bike paths that make our lives better, cool down the neighborhood, and bring people together. Then after a while, you might see the conversation shift back towards the level 4 changes that we can't get done without a larger group of people beside us. You might want to know how your state deals with drought and water conservation, how changes in urban policy can cut traffic congestion and bring neighborhoods closer together, or what your community can do, apart from the amazing things you're already doing, to help California reach its goal of producing 85% of its electricity from clean sources by 2030. Changes at all of those levels can happen and will happen because people make them happen. You get to decide where to start and what to do next. My main piece of advice would be to give yourself a break on the small stuff, do your recycling and composting, but realize that you're not a bad person if it isn't 100%. It isn't going to be 100%. And then look for ways to translate your personal commitment into that bigger picture change that we also need. It doesn't need to be partisan. It doesn't need to be controversial. In the next section, we'll just get into how just common sense. So whichever you prefer, we're coming toward the top of the hour, and I hope I'm not being too long-winded here. We can either stop for a quick question or I can keep going, whichever is best, Lola.
Why don't you keep going? And if you have a couple more minutes, and then let's get to some questions here.
Okay, there's a fair bit left here, but I would prefer not to leave anything out if I can help it. I will ask you, please, the timing with sort of the breaks in the middle has not quite been what I prepared. So if I'm going over, please just interrupt, but I will try to get through the last of my segment.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So we've talked about the depth of the climate crisis. We've talked about building our own climate solutions. I really want to leave you with the idea that how we talk about climate change is almost as important as what we do about it. And I've hinted at that, but I want to go a little bit deeper into this, because how we talk about it is about how we build buy-in for faster, deeper carbon cuts. As I've said, cities are the levels of government where most of us can exert the most influence, and where some officials are loud and proud about measuring their carbon emissions and setting out to reduce them. But I've also talked to city planners who know they aren't I've talked to city planners who do know that they're accountable to communities that don't much care about their emissions. And if voters aren't making climate change a priority, they can't either. However, those planners know nobody who enjoys spending an hour and a half each way each day in gridlock traffic, pre-pandemic or post. No one who likes bad air days, and certainly not the emergency room visits that result. They work for people who love their bike paths and nature trails, who would be so grateful for a grocery store within walking distance, rather than a drive to the supermarket for a carton of milk. Whether or not the vehicle's electric, the point is, it's right around the corner. And after 2 pandemic years of supply chain disruptions on top of severe weather, they're hearing a lot more from citizens about local and nearby food production, reliable energy systems, and the support people need to stay safe in the next emergency. The city officials have taught me that those are all climate solution messages, minus the dreaded C words like climate and carbon and crisis. I love trying to see how deeply into a climate conversation I can get without saying the word climate. I know how perverse that is, but it seems that the conversations are so much better when you can do that. Those planners have found positive values that the most avid environmentalist and the most notorious climate denier can hold in common, and cut carbon along the way. So here's a good place to start. I've learned that what if is one of the most powerful questions we can ask. It gives us a window on what just might be possible, just by tilting our assumptions by 10 or 15 degrees. Or maybe by tilting the conversation 180 degrees, starting out from what's in it for each of us and all of us in climate solutions, getting the hands-on experience that shows people those solutions work, that they actually make life better, then translating that experience and excitement and hope into an irresistible call to action. So let's take a quick what-if journey through a menu of climate solutions that start out from where we live, then work from the ground up. What if the pandemic taught us that people can work from home 1 or 2 days out of 5, rather than donating 90 minutes of unpaid commuting time each way each day? What if the next generation of millennial employees wanted that flexibility and expected employers who were attuned to climate solutions? And what if the best way, or the only way, for those employers to retain the bright young millennial employees they need is to get with that program? What if it were the late 1980s and you were working on a previously unimagined system of global connectivity that would put an end to print newspapers, for better and for worse, wipe out much of the need for retail space, again, for better and for worse, reduce air travel for meetings that you could now attend online, and at every step, cut loads of carbon as a result? What if you decided to call that system the internet? Don't ever let anyone try to tell you that some smart people dreamed up the internet in the 1980s because they knew people in the 2010s and 20s would be scared witless by climate change. But the internet still had that unintended effect. Just imagine if we'd been trying. Then what if solar and wind, not coal, not gas, turned out to be the best way to power the data centers that kept that global system running? What if the battery that powered your next car, or maybe your current car, could put money in your pocket when your electric utility used it to store power for an all renewable grid? And what if you bought that electric car, knowing that it would curb your emissions, but secretly craving your time behind the wheel because it was such a fun ride and so cheap to operate? What if making every building net zero for energy and carbon made them cheaper to heat and cool, and stopped the poorest among us from having to choose between food and fuel? Then made all of us more resilient in the next climate disaster, and created many thousands of jobs that couldn't be exported. To your point just now about transition, who could blame you if you were terrified that action on climate change would steal away your well-paying job in the fossil industry, until you realized your employer was already trying to replace you with a robot? And what if you could make a good, secure living putting your skills to work in the clean energy economy? In Canada right now, that's the route that more than 2/3 of our fossil sector workers want to follow. We just need to get the deals in place to make it happen. And what if we redirected the $5.9 trillion that the world spent on fossil fuel subsidies in 2020? That's a mind-bending $11.2 million per minute of every hour of every day in the year. What if we redirected that to a product that didn't fry the planet when used as directed? All the pieces of this what if universe are ready to roll. In fact, most of them are rolling out as we speak. And they're a gateway to the bigger picture solutions that will get us where we need to go, massively increasing the energy efficiency of everything, decarbonizing fuels and electricity, rethinking our cities to cut sprawl and increase transit, restoring forests, bogs, and farmland to store carbon, and chasing out fossil fuels once and for all. Down this road lie millions of jobs that have already been created in the carbon-free economy, with tens of millions more to follow. It's about safer communities and cleaner water, more nature trails and less traffic congestion, healthier soils and more productive, profitable farms, and goats, and a world we can live in safely and comfortably, and proudly pass on to our children and theirs. So I'm going to take us into the Q&A finally by asking you to situate yourselves in the year 2030 or 35 and look around you. And some of this goes back to the features that we've already heard about from Ray. So as you'll see, so much of this is already happening today. You're living in a beautiful, comfortable building that produces as much energy as it consumes, or maybe sells its surplus back to the grid. Most of the food you eat is produced within a 50 to 100 mile radius, and on good days, you get to produce some of it yourself. Most of the services you need are no more than 15 minutes away on foot or by bike, and your nifty new electric bike makes it easier to get up hills or ride home with a load of groceries. If you have to go farther, you have easy access to safe, clean, efficient, affordable transit. The world is a tougher place with too frequent climate disasters and way too many climate refugees on the move. But we've finally got the message that no one ever gets on the boat unless it's safer than land, and that applies to overland refugees too. And we're all doing what we can to help. Everyone wishes we'd started sooner and moved faster to get climate change under control, but we've started turning the tide, and we can all look back on what we started doing in 2020 or 21 or 22, or in your case in 2006, to do our part. So to kick off the Q&A, when you look back from 2035, what did you do in 22 to make a difference? Or what did you need to find out or talk to other people about before you could get started? Thank you so much for inviting me to spend this time with you, and I can't wait to see where our conversation goes next.
So thank you
Lola?
so much. Thank you so much, Mitchell. That was wonderful. And Ray, if you want to come on screen as well. So one of the questions that we want to answer here, I want to thank Annette and Henrietta for piping up and saying this, is that you are preaching to the choir. So we have all bought into this, and that's part of the reason why we're here in this webinar, is because this resonates with us. So Christopher makes a really good point. You know, there's deniers out there that make it really difficult for us to get across these ideas and to get some action going. So his question is, what can those who recognize the reality of climate change do when the political climate is so negative towards it? And through these conversations, starting this conversation with legacy talks, that's part of it, is how do we have the conversations with people who may not be willing or even recognize that there's an issue?
When I said before, that's a fabulous question, and it's one that drives a lot of the work that we do, both with the mix and also in some of the other policy and communications advisory work that we've been doing for the past, at least over the last 3 or 4 years. And our starting point on that is, yes, we absolutely have to get this conversation outside the bubble, because there are not enough of us inside the bubble to drive the level of change we need. And we're here, let me lecture at you about this again, but we're only going to be able to get it done by going outside the bubble and listening and not lecturing, and starting out with the priorities and the issues and the concerns that people woke up with this morning, rather than try to get them to shift over to ours, because that won't happen. But in the talk, I tried to suggest, and there are so many more, there were just a few examples of climate change messages that don't have to be about climate change. The city planners that I referred to was a particular project a few years ago, and there have been other conversations since, but I think of one planner in a community in Colorado, he was the one who said, I can't talk about climate change because it's my job to do what the community wants. And this community is not interested in climate change. But however, to say that they are fanatical about their bike paths and their nature trails is a real understatement, and in a good way. They will protect them, they want them, right? They want more. Well, something that gets us out of our cars and into nature, that's a climate solution. It's not the whole solution. No one solution is the whole. Shutting down fossil fuels is not the whole solution in one. There are all these multiple different pieces, and if we can discover what is the piece and what is the motivation that will drive somebody, honestly, I'm not here to try to convince them that the climate science is right. I know it is. I don't need them to know it is. If I can just sort of quickly tell one story that comes from the state of Georgia, I'm not going to name names, but there is a person that I've never met, and I haven't heard anything about in the last 2 or 3 years, but at one point I was hearing about a lot. She had joined the Tea Party when it formed in 2010. And not too many years later, she formed something called the Green Tea Party. And it wasn't just that she was changing her choice of beverage. She had decided that in the state of Georgia, she wanted to be an all-out, go for broke solar advocate. It wasn't because she cared about climate change. I have no idea whether she believed the science, and I don't need to know. Her issue was that she was darned if the utility was going to tell her how to use power and what to pay for it. So she wanted that energy independence. And if that's what motivated her into solar in a state like Georgia that is so blessed with solar resources, all I can say is bring it on. You know, I mean, I would love to have the conversation, understand with her why she needed to join the Tea Party. But as a climate person, she's into renewables and she's into solutions. Let's have that conversation and start from what we agree on rather than what we might disagree on.
So Ray, from your perspective, because you've taken a lot of action, and I can anticipate that you've had hundreds of people come to you say, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Or why are we doing this? And why are we doing that? Right. So you've heard both sides of the story from people who live in our communities or who live in the greater Bay Area. So what are some of the conversation tips that you've had that you've learned over the years on how to have the most productive conversations when there are naysayers?
Well, I think one is using the science, which makes sense to me. That's something that it's clear cut. The data is there. It makes sense. Now, there are people that still deny that. You have to be a bit stubborn. And I am stubborn. So we would have to just keep pushing along. I think using, and I didn't want to get into politics or anything like that, but you'd have to really communicate as best you can and gather people together. So it's not just one voice, but acting as a community. So as we come together as a community, I think we can make more of an impact. And unfortunately, some things get done with political pressure. Some things don't. But I didn't want to make this presentation, those webinars, as a portal to politics, because there's so many different opinions, and none of them are really wrong. Everybody's has a right to their own. But I think that gathering together as a community, being open and not closed-minded to different techniques and how we could do things better, and criticize yourselves. Be honest about it. And say, you know what, we really failed in this area. And it's okay to fail. Let's try to do things better the next time we get it around. But I think that's where you get it, is strength with numbers.
If you'll permit me a quick reframe on that, Ray, on the idea that you failed. I love the idea that a hypothesis is called a hypothesis because it isn't proving yet, we're testing it. And if a hypothesis fails, if the thing we thought was just going to work beautifully completely falls flat, we tried. Ideally, we got through it quickly. We learned what we could from it, and we thanked it on the way out the door. That's not a fail, that's a learning experience.
And I'll tell you that I will take complete responsibility for ban the bag and ban the straw, to only find out that now cups use more plastic instead of offering us a straw, and bags are thicker and maybe not as biodegradable, or as at least break down, as well as the very thin bags. And those are things that I learned over time when I said I was going to go out and be an advocate for the environment and take action.
But this goes back to the idea that nobody is perfect at this. I'm not going to sit here and claim to you that I had a zero carbon lifestyle. I don't want to lie to you, right? And there's no such thing. And we could spend every waking minute, every breathing moment trying to drive down our personal carbon footprints. And if everybody in the world did that consistently, if everybody in the world had the capacity to do it at all, that activity would get us 40% of the emission reductions we need. So, trying what we can, learning what we need to, improving a little bit every day, and then again, figuring out how that local and personal and household action can translate into bigger things that we don't control in our own lives. I think if all it does is set aside the guilt and second guessing, that's already something. And then just watch what we can get done.
So Norma, I want to tell you that I really, really want to talk about cattle and beef, but we're not going to talk about that today. I'd like to invite you to join us both on June 15th and June 29th On June 15th, we will have some folks talking more about managing the waste in the kitchen. And then on June 29th, we'll be getting more into into methane and CO2 and the different pollutants there are. So I'm going to give the last 2 minutes here to Ray, and then we're going to wrap it up. Ray, there's some people who really want to know more about the solar panels and how they could work on a skyscraping building. So tell us about, and I know, Mitchell, you know about science that's coming. So tell us about the things that we should know that could potentially be in the future for solar panels or taking us off the dependency of the grid.
Well, first of all, great questions. And like I said before, technology is changing every minute of the day. And I know that Mitchell and I actually had a conversation about micro solar panels that were on glazing. So we are researching that. And we'd have to find out how we can actually, is it something that's affordable? Is it something that we can, just do a simple swap? So that is something that we're definitely researching for all the communities, because the sun's there, even if there's fog, there's still sun. So we could take a look at that. And I'm definitely open to the idea. It might be a very large capital investment, but we'll have to definitely look into that. So that is on our radar screen. And Mitchell, I think, has more information actually on some of those panels that are being developed. And there's other ones as well. I think there's a food waste solar panel.
I love that.
Yeah, so food waste, everybody eats. And so there's food waste solar panels that are being created. And that's something we're definitely looking into as well.
I heard about the food waste panel from you for the first time, Ray, and I'm keeping an eye out for that. I really want to learn more about it. Your point about micro solar in the glazing or the window glass in a building. We have seen a number of research reports on that, and as you say, it's not here yet, but it's on the way. We are also seeing really nice progress, and it's been in fits and starts over too long, frankly, but it has been coming along. What is called building integrated photovoltaics, and photovoltaics are solar electric cells. Building integrated means that it becomes the siding of the building. It becomes a part of the design of the building. There are some just flat out exquisite building integrated photovoltaic systems in place. And in our family, my daughter's the architect, so I don't get to comment on design authoritatively, but I can tell you that to an amateur, it's gorgeous. And to somebody who knows solar cells, that aspect of it is definitely gorgeous. So I would expect that the cost of those systems will just vary by the installation, vary by the local market. But really, it's on the way. And what I was saying earlier, I was of two minds about going into that longer story about the technology that we reviewed in 2013 and what's happened with them since. But now I'm glad I did, because they really make the point that just as in 2013, if we were being cautious about the technologies we built into our scenarios, we weren't including offshore wind, we weren't including hydrogen, we weren't including batteries, because we wanted to be honest and diligent to the evidence, and we wanted to err on the side of caution. Similarly, today in 2022, you're still at a research stage with microsolar embedded in glass. I can't sit here and predict that that'll be here a decade from now. We smashed the crystal ball the last time we moved to the office. We haven't been able to replace it. However, that pace of change is really typical of the smaller scale technologies that renewables depend on. So, everybody watch this space, because there's so much exciting stuff going on, as you said, Ray.
Great. Thank you, Mitchell, and thank you, Ray, for the information that you provided today. And based on this discussion, I feel optimistic. So I'm very much looking forward to our next couple of legacy talks that we have coming up. And for our viewers, they can go to sequoialiving.org/webinar and see the description. But on June 15th, we have a discussion about what's in your kitchen trash. We have a couple of people who work in dining services for Sequoia Living who will be talking about waste management and how to really monitor and do purchasing. So That's exciting. And then on June 29th, we have a speaker from Stanford, as well as somebody from Marin Sanitary Services. And we're going to be talking about the methane that's off-gassed from compost or from organic material in the landfill, and then talk about air quality in depth. So I hope that everybody joins us. Again, thank you, Mitchell and Ray, for your time today. And I would like to thank our sponsor, Senior Services of Northern California, who is the philanthropic foundation of Sequoia Living. And I want to remind you that I will send out the recording within the next few days. So keep your eye on your email. Take care, everyone.